direct from our Newsfirst studios here in Colombo, bringing you face-to-face as usual. I am Zaima Ratnaika for the Newsfirst team. And tonight my topic of discussion is a pertinent topic that has been debated in many a fora and also was recently a highlight in Parliament. I am talking about the Sri Lanka Electricity Bill. To talk about this and much more, I have in the studios tonight Attorney at Law Thishya Weragoda and Attorney at Law Nuwan Bopage. A very good evening to you gentlemen and welcome on the show.
Thank you.
To start off tonight's proceedings, I want to first give a bit of a background to our viewers on Sri Lanka's newly passed electricity bill. It was passed a couple of weeks ago in Parliament with amendments that the Supreme Court had proposed or recommended. And the bill is intended to introduce wide-ranging reforms to Sri Lanka's power generation sector. However, once this bill was gazetted, several parties did go to the Supreme Court questioning its constitutionality, and these two attorneys who are present here today have been appearing on behalf of those parties at the Supreme Court. So to start off, Mr. Weragoda, let me kick off tonight's conversation with you. What sort of clauses within this bill that has now been passed can you see are somewhat detrimental or may have a detrimental or a negative impact on Sri Lanka's power sector and energy sector as a whole?
So if you look at the structure or the scheme, the power generation, whether it's hydro, coal, so on and so forth,
yes.
That sector has been taken away into one arm.
Okay.
And then transmission is a second aspect that they look at, and then number 3 is distribution. That's what comes to our houses.
Yes.
So the idea is that it's a network unbundling. Right now we have this one giant,
the CEB.
The CEB. So they're trying to break it into small parts.
I see.
The supposed purpose is competitiveness. But whether that is achieved is something that we will see in the next 10 to 15 years. Because as we know, laws once passed are here to stay unless Parliament itself reforms.
Certainly.
And we know our Parliament is very slow to reform something that they put in place.
Yes.
So in that sense, the bill itself proposed the setting up of an entity for hydropower, an entity for coal power generation, so on and so forth.
Right.
And some of those entities were state-owned. Some of those entities were entities that could sell up to 50%
I see.
to the private sector.
Right.
So overall, the idea is at the end of the day, there is going to be some sort of privatization.
Right.
So for example, the transmission lines. Right now, the transmission assets held by the CEB will go into an entity where 50% is held by the state. The balance can be sold off.
Sold off, yes.
But also there is opportunity for private individuals with capacity to come in and set up additional entities that could operate transmission lines. So for example, some entity which has a few $100 million could come obtain an additional, what is called an additional transmission licensee license and operate. So they also become part of a national asset.
Okay.
And they own those assets. They own the soil on which those transmission lines are operated on. So of course, these are matters of national security as well. But of course, if Parliament thinks that this is the best way to go forward, at the end of it, in a representative democracy, we are supposed to accept the fact that Parliament is acting in our best interest.
Right.
But of course, when you look at how the Supreme Court determines matters, I think the Supreme Court essentially said that this bill as a whole violates Article 12, which means that the right to equality is not there. So with little amendments, they say that you can pass it, and that's how it has been passed.
Right. So, Mr. Bopage, sticking to the same topic, there were allegations that were leveled against the government claiming that this bill was brought to the fore very hurriedly and it was passed in a very hasty manner. that is something that opposition factions have been leveling against the government. Do you, in your personal opinion and also in your professional sense, believe that this was in fact brought in haste and that there are certain shortcomings within this bill?
Yeah, of course. The main thing that now this is not mere reforms to the electricity sector.
Right.
In 1969, Sri Lanka Electricity Board Act was passed. There are specific provisions saying that this electricity is not a commodity.
Right.
It's a service.
Okay.
Actually, people are working, and industrial sector is they are manufacturing certain things. All these sectors are contributing to national economy. State, as the main governing body, giving this supply electricity as a service to these sectors. So that is the main concept. It's the main fundamental basis. It's not a commodity. Now, in terms of this electricity act, this Ranil Rajapaksa government, actually they are completely changing this policy. So that is what they are doing. For example, in the preamble, it says the activities of the electricity board and the creation of market competition in these activities.
Okay.
So earlier it was not commodity, but in the preamble it's very clear they want to convert it to a profit earning commodity. So that is the concept.
Okay.
So that's why, as you said, why they are bringing this very hurry and without consulting the people, without having any discussion with the engineers, all these sectors. That's why they are bringing. Then, as Thishya said, so in order to convert it to a profit earning commodity, then you have to privatize it.
Yes.
As to how we are going to privatize, there's a schedule in this particular act. They are going to unbundling. They are want to establish 12 or more than companies for the sake of generation, distribution, transmission, and other services.
Right.
Then hereinafter, there's no Ceylon Electricity Board. They are going to convert it to 12 companies and give these services to these companies. Then it's clear-cut privatization. Important thing is they are actually making central body it says national system operator. National system operator, now there are a lot of icing in this particular bill, but inside that you can see the danger. This national system operator could enter into agreements with other countries to purchase electricity.
I see.
Number one is that. Going further, it vested with powers to connect our main grid to grid of any other country.
Right.
So this is the, among all the other icings, these are the main things that we can see as powers of the national system operator.
Okay.
Then, most important thing is there's interpretation given to the national grid. That interpretation earlier given excluding 33 kilowatt from the main grid.
Okay.
So 33 kilowatt is the main transmission line.
Yes.
So they excluded that.
Okay.
Just 2 days prior to bringing this act, the minister declared that they entered into agreement with Adani company to build a wind power plant. It's around 468 kilowatts. Then it's very clear why they are excluding 33 kilowatt. Hereinafter, they can connect our grid to the India. We can purchase from India, and people like Adani can build their own plants here and lay main grids. Obviously, it is below 33 kilowatts. Then they get the right to that. Then 5-6 years down the line, the entire electricity sector in the hand of India and multinational companies and other companies. The mockery is, it's directly affect the people of the country because according to electricity board engineers, they are providing 99% electricity supply to the country. Then people are only purchasing this. Now people doesn't know what is the impact of this act. That's the mockery. This parliament, which doesn't have any mandate, just passed this election. If this danger, if the gravity of these sections, if people doesn't know anything about that, just around 100 and 150 people get together and pass this bill, completely changing the electricity policy, completely converting into the private entity, and thereafter no control at all to the government. So That's a
So
fundamental.
if I may just add
Yes,
one
certainly.
thing, which was referred to in the Supreme Court also. In a case called Sunil Senaviratne versus Shelton Gunasekara, the Supreme Court itself held electrical energy in the present context is indispensable from human life, and the society would be put in severe hardship if these services are not made available.
Right.
Any deficiency in service would lead to severe hardship on society. To provide a service to all consumers without any discrimination and to provide safe and adequate service in a timely manner are recognized duties of a public utility. So now, like what Nuwan was saying, when there is openings made, we can talk about it later on,
Yes.
it raises certain eyebrows, and it's very unfortunate that the public doesn't know most of these issues.
So, Thishya, I want to stick to this bill, and one word that has been synonymous with this entire bill is the unbundling of the CEB. And this bill essentially creates 12 corporations. I was doing my research, so it says 4 companies for power generation, 2 for transmission, 5 for distribution, and 1 for the Provident Fund. Do you, in your personal opinion, believe that it needs to be this complicated? Why cannot it be made more simple, even if it is to invite competition into the power generation sector in Sri Lanka?
so-
Why do you need so many corporations to be created?
So I believe that some of these, for example, the hydro. Now, hydro cannot be large-scale hydro.
Yes.
That would be the mega projects along the Mahaveli, so on and so forth. I don't think that they could be privatized anyhow.
Right.
Because the water is required
Yes.
for agricultural purposes,
Irrigation, whatnot,
irrigation
yes.
management, to flood control, to various things. So I don't think that could ever be privatized because there are too many government stakeholders
within that.
So
portion, yes.
that obviously has to stay. Coal, probably they're trying to make it privatizable,
Right.
but then for wind power to various things, obviously there's already private entities. Like Nuwan mentioned earlier, a private entity was, the minister said a private entity is given cabinet approval for 485 megawatts
Right.
in the northern peninsula. So the weird thing is, like Nuwan said, there are very little sugar coatings. There was one clause which we challenged, which said that if the cabinet or ministers had given approval, in principle approval, to a particular project, procurement guidelines don't apply.
Right.
So it gave a window. The bill had a 6-month window, and in the 6 months, if the cabinet or ministers give approvals, then those don't have to go through the procurement process.
guidance, right.
So why would the government, which is trying to privatize and supposedly increase competition, say we will give in principle approval to some people, and those guys can go ahead without any process. So I believe the Supreme Court held that that is unconstitutional,
Right.
and said that has been issued, has been selected pursuant to a competitive and transparent procurement process. So those words were added by the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court basically said that if those words are not there, and if just because there's in principle approval, if you can go ahead, that is unconstitutional. So you see, certain words, the use or lack thereof, can change the landscape completely. So this is one such instance. Same goes for the other issue, transmission lines.
Right.
The 33 kVA lines was excluded.
Okay.
So when it's not there, we
So
need
those
to
are the
be
loopholes that can be exploited.
loopholes that are created so that other people can
Can
exploit it.
exploit them. So, Nuwan, I want to direct your attention towards national security and Sri Lanka's energy sovereignty. We know whatever law is formulated in a country, it should serve the best interests of that country. According to you, in this particular bill or act that will come into play, what sort of safeguards have been put in place to ensure that Sri Lanka's energy sovereignty will be protected? Are there any safeguards? Should there be more safeguards?
Actually, of course, now this bill is only one example.
I see.
So there is a series of previous decisions taken by the government regarding the energy sector is concerned. Now, for example, now in Sri Lanka, now already oil distribution is concerned. Now monopoly is now completely goes to India.
Yes.
Then Trincomalee oil tanks, and at the same time LNG sector is concerned. Now policy decision has been taken in 2013. All the thermal plants converted into LNG. At the same time, the agreement was entered to have a terminal with India to supply LNG supply. So in 2013, LNG power plants are concerned, completely monopoly will go to the India. Wind power also the same. So likewise, there is a series of previous actions taken by the government, and then they wanted to bring cover to all these activities through this act. So it's very clear who was drafted. This bill is also actually doubtful.
Right.
So sometimes we believe it has been drafted by India. So that's the reality. Now, as you said, sovereignty, energy sovereignty is concerned, it's very important because using one switch, entire sovereignty of the country should be surrendered, could be surrendered to India or any other country.
Right.
Because that is what happened, you know, once there is an issue in Nepal because the entire monopoly was with India. So because of that, ultimately this completely, it's like an invasion.
Okay.
So Europe, we know what happened during the war, using the gas line, how Russia controlled the entire Europe.
Yes.
Likewise, a country like Sri Lanka, when we compare to India with that giant energy sector, they have nuclear plants. Once we connect it to India, actually our entire system will be collapsed. Therefore, we have to completely rely upon India energy. So this particular bill is concerned completely, it's a betray Sri Lankan sovereignty to India. It's very clear. On the other hand, as you said, now there is a company mania as far as this government is concerned. Now recently actually we supported economic transformation bill, where what they are going to do, convert BOI into 5 companies. Here, national system operator, which they introduce in lieu of electricity board, it's also a company.
Right.
Only difference is 100% shares holding by the government, but it doesn't say that can be sold one day.
Okay.
Then in the schedule, for hydropower plant, there is a separate company. Coal power, separate company. Thermal power, separate company. Wind power, separate company. Then the main transmission line is also concerned. You can get a license and a company can take it. So now we know in day-to-day life we are doing cases in the commercial high court. This company is not a celestial court or something.
Yes.
So all these companies, if they can't make out profit out of that, they are doing all dirty things. That's the reality. So merely because your company,
it's not all about
can't
altruism.
trust.
Yes.
Day-to-day life, we are filing, we are doing hundreds of wide enough cases.
Right.
How they are misusing, though merely because it is a company, you cannot expect transparency.
Right.
Now here the electricity board is concerned, we have experience for last 5 decades. Somehow they managed to give this electricity supply. So what they wanted, new technology and other things, the government could provide. Most important thing is, if they are saying this electricity board is not profitable, ultimately people have to pay. Now last 6 months is concerned, the profit of the electricity board, I think more than 60 billion.
Skyrocketed. Yes.
60 billion. So none of the companies could earn that. Now it's a profitable.
Yes.
If you are bringing this bill, it is not profitable. Once it is profitable, company, why you are selling? So it's very clear this is an agenda of some other country. Obviously it is the agenda of India. Then it's completely giving the sovereignty of the people to the hands of countries like India.
Right. So Thishya, according to my understanding, one of the purposes of bringing this bill by the government is to convert Sri Lanka's power generation sector to generate revenue or dollar revenue, so to speak. And we know the renewable energy sector in Sri Lanka is very rich. We have a lot of resources that will contribute to renewable energy in Sri Lanka. But what sort of clauses are included in this bill to ensure that, yes, we can earn dollar inflows through selling our renewable energy, but at the same time ensuring that private corporations don't make undue profits or compromise or to exploit the renewable sector, energy sector in Sri Lanka?
So the renewable energy sector, essentially any party can obtain a generation license.
I see.
So for example, the entity that was told that they can operate a 485 megawatt plant
Yes.
in the north, in Mana and in Punari. So they just need the license. So they manufacture it,
Right.
generate it, not manufacture. So once it's generated, it has to be connected to the national grid. Now the national systems operator can decide that a transmission line can be connected to what is called a regional market.
Okay.
Now the definition of a regional market, if I may,
I'm sure our viewers are very interested to know the nitty-gritty of this bill.
electrical market that is in operation outside the territory of Sri Lanka within the South Asian region.
Right. The regional market.
It's a,
Okay.
No, it's not a regional market, it's
That's
a
the
South
term.
Asian
Okay.
market.
Right. Okay.
So to whom can we connect? To Maldives? Obviously not. We are only 30 whatever kilometers away from the POX Strait. There's a talk of a bridge coming over as well. So in that sense, we all know there's a
Which
saying
country?
there's a saying in Sinhala, guna herenne මොකටද කියලා. So likewise, I think it's very clear as to in which direction this whole process is going. Now, yes, we might be able to sell to South India, we might be able to generate some money. But whether that money would come back to the country or go into a private entity that is generating. So we might not get any money from transmission because it will probably be an additional transmission licensee. Again,
Yes.
for incorporation.
For incorporation.
The generation money also will go to a foreign entity. So we'll probably get a licensing revenue
Commission or
commission
fee.
or something. But how much would that go?
Or a kickback or two.
Kickback certainly yes. But that aside, I mean, the generation money will go to the generating entity, which will be a private entity. Transmission revenue will go to the transmission entity. So probably the systems operator will charge a levy on top. So that's all we are talking about. Our resources, we are basically giving them an opportunity to draw lines. The government will acquire property and give it to those entities.
To the private entities.
So the general public's lands will be taken away for these projects.
Right.
Given the public will be compensated, yes. But then the money goes somewhere else. It might never come back to Sri Lanka.
So in hindsight, where is consumer protectionism in this bill? Or what sort of view has the government taken in ensuring the electricity users' protection in the long run?
With regard to that, I think the whole idea is that the regulator has to be very strong. So if you look at it, clause 48, if I remember right, the power of the minister to make regulations.
Yes, I want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, I think it was clause 48. That's right. So the powers of the minister is in clause 48. Now, if you look at it, there's an advisory council. The minister appoints them. The regulator has to be advised by the minister. That's not the job of a regulator.
Yes.
The regulator is supposed to tell the minister, you do this.
Yes.
That's the job of a regulator. But instead, the bill was drafted in a way which essentially says that everybody is under the minister. But thankfully, the Supreme Court has said clause 48, which says that the minister can remove all obstacles, procedural obstacles. That violates the constitution and that can't stand. So at least that aspect has been taken away.
So the basis of having checks and balances has essentially been taken away from the base form of this bill until the Supreme Court provided its recommendation.
Certainly. So that also brings us to this very interesting question. Now, these are all bills where the the Attorney General, Honorable Attorney General, gives a certificate saying that this is constitutional.
Yes.
And then the Supreme Court says, no, it's completely unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional, yes.
And the Attorney General gets an opportunity of coming and justifying it also. So it raises this very interesting constitutional question as to what exactly is the state and
Is the purpose.
As to why the state would say this is constitutional, and then if the Supreme Court is to go on and say no, the whole thing is unconstitutional, then there is a serious problem as to what the Honorable Attorney General certifies.
So I want to go beyond the scope of the electricity bill and talk about some of the laws that have been proposed over the past 7-8 months. We saw how the new version of the Anti-Terror Act was brought, and also the Broadcast Regulation Commission, which was supposed to regulate media corporations like us. And there were many flaws and shortcomings and unconstitutional elements embedded within those laws and drafts. Where do you think that a certain entity who is drafting those laws gets the idea to put pen to paper and draft such regulations? Yes, we know that the Supreme Court will provide its recommendations, but in the primary form of any particular draft, how do they come up with such draconian laws from time to time? Nuwan, I want to pose this as an open question to both of you, because I want to know, as a discerning citizen of the country, how these laws continue to be churned out with a lot of regressive clauses.
Yeah, no sequence of incidents taken place is clearly analyzed. First of all, government brought few draconian laws, giving an indication there are going to be more law reforms. Then trade unions and progressive other people, you have to be careful, because once these acts are into operation, you cannot anymore protest or challenge the next legal reforms of the government.
Yes.
For instance, online safety bill, anti-terrorism act.
Act.
So all these acts were brought prior to bringing these recent new bills. Then after that, this electricity bill. Then thereafter, before that, there are the debt
restructuring bill and the economic reform bill.
Then now economic transformation bill, and there are series of another, as far as the water supply is concerned, now they are going to bring another bill. Then as far as the labor law is concerned, they are going to repeal all the labor laws and bring one labor law.
So more laws in the pipeline.
Yes.
Right.
So likewise, now they are going to bring more laws. Using this disaster situation, what they are going to build up the disaster capitalism. Using the disaster, people are under very difficult, they are living under very difficult,
yes, a lot of stress.
Yes. So using that, what they want to bring all these reforms, for what purpose? Purpose is opening these all the sectors to the private companies and to do whatever they want inside the country, at the same time giving the control to majority of these sectors to India. That is their prime objective.
Right.
Now there is a section that arguing that is good, giving this privatization is good, it's create a competition. As a result of competition, people
will get rid of loss-making companies. Yeah.
Now we have been experiencing the oil distribution sector. Right now, electricity distribution, now they are going to give it to company. Prior to that, the oil distribution had been given to IOC and other few companies.
Right.
So where's this market competition? How the people were benefited out of that? Instead of that, what is happening now? We are paying more than previously. So that is the reality. These companies are coming to Sri Lanka just to own the profit.
Right.
So they need not to run these as services to the people. So that is the objective of these companies. So Adani won't come to Sri Lanka without profit. So they are profit-making ventures. They are running. So therefore, it's very clear these previous draconian laws were introduced to give alarm in people. We are going to have next few reforms. Then now these reforms are now coming to the surface one after another. Now they are passing this bill. So the other thing is, now this expose the mockery of this representative democracy.
I see.
Now we are talking about representative democracy, and we are honorable members are in the parliament. That's what we were taught when we were
Public
learning.
representatives.
So there's, as you said, there's a check and balance, the parliament, executive and judiciary.
Judiciary, yes.
But where's this check and balance? As Thishya said, even after Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional, this parliament is passing. Where's this check and so-called
Balances.
check and balance? Now it is not there anymore. Instead of this perpetuated representative democracy, we need participatory democracy. Otherwise, people couldn't get anything out of that.
Their
That's why-
aspirations cannot be
So
fulfilled.
they are bringing these bills. People doesn't know. Ultimately, people only paying for electricity. We know some Rajapaksa's son, he didn't pay the electricity bill even. But people, if we have not paid, within 2-3 days after simple notice, they cut off our line.
I don't think I will have anyone to pay my electricity bill.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
So those who are paying the electricity bill now affected due to this, but they don't know anything. They don't know anything. So that is the mockery of this representative democracy.
Right.
So we have to think about this twice.
So Thishya, would you like to?
Yeah. So I think there is a serious flaw in our lawmaking process.
Okay.
One aspect is that our constitution recognizes the possibility of laws which are unconstitutional being passed.
Okay.
You can pass a bill which is unconstitutional with 2/3 majority.
Or a
Or
referendum.
2/3 majority plus a
I
referendum.
see.
So, technically speaking, our constitution promotes this notion that there can be unconstitutional things that are passed. I think that gives a lot of power to the powers that be, that they can get away with it.
So are you proposing that a new constitutional
No,
constitution is needed?
No, I don't
altogether?
think that. Well, that's been mooted for the last 20
Quite,
years.
yes, certainly.
But that aside, I think we need to get rid of this sort of system. We also need to have a system where, and we also only have 14 days to challenge any bill.
And we saw how certain bills were gazetted close to public holidays.
That's the thing. And we've seen in the past, now at least these are published online.
Yes.
So we can just go online and find
scroll
it. But,
through, yes.
but 20 years ago, we didn't have that facility, and we had to go stand
There's
outside
very
the government
minimum
printer.
transparency, yes.
No, we had to go stand in front of the government printer, and the government
To obtain.
printer would issue the document only the day before.
I see.
So that, and back then it was only 7 days. So the other side of it is some subcommittee will draft it. God knows who sometimes. And we had a situation with the online safety bill where the subcommittee members came out in public saying that no, that's not what we drafted. We walked out of it.
Right.
So it became nobody's baby. Right? And then the cabinet gives a nod. Then the Attorney General is supposed to give a nod. Then it comes to the legal draftsman. Then it goes back to the cabinet sometimes, or it gets published. Right? So in this process, some of these things are never consultative. For example, a few weeks ago, there was a bill titled Non-Governmental Organization Reforms or something like that.
Right.
Went through the entire process, tabled, first reading done, challenged in the Supreme Court. The state comes and says, we are withdrawing it. So if you look at this 2024, there's been at least 70 cases filed so far. 70 constitutional challenges.
Cases.
So maybe about 20 bills, 15 or 20 bills. But this is all resources of the people. It's usually the same set of lawyers who are retained to go and appear, and most of them it's pro deo.
Yes.
Right, because they do it on principle. So then the question is this a way of people weighing down, the powers that be weighing down on, I mean, for example, Nuwan, he'd probably be winning the Supreme Court on SDs the last 3 weeks continuously.
So
Right?
they're trying to wear the people down.
It does. And people don't have the wherewithal to, I mean, public interest litigation is costly still.
Yes. Certainly.
The photocopy bills alone. So when you look at it that way, people can't afford it. So I think it's important that we realize that this whole legal process, it's also flawed. So whenever we go for constitutional reforms, I think the first thing is we need to get rid of this, if it's unconstitutional, you can't proceed kind of thing. And we also need to have post-enactment review. Because the Supreme Court has 3 weeks from the date of challenge to give a determination. And if the Supreme Court for some reason decides in a different way, now for example, the online safety bill, I personally believe that the determination is contrary to 30 years of constitutional law in this country.
Okay.
But now that's law.
Yes.
So maybe a future Supreme Court should be able to say this is unconstitutional. But we don't have that luxury. So these are things I believe that need to change.
So these are the progressive moves that need to be made in a modern country. So we are coming into the end of the show, but since we have a bit of time, I want to speak to you about Sri Lanka's public sector. And I was watching the debate in Parliament prior to the third reading, or during the third reading of the electricity bill, and what Minister Kansana Wijesekara said was the people blame the minister in charge or the subject minister at the time for the excessive costs of electricity and so on, the exorbitant costs that are charged. But there is a portion within the CEB and a political group that are controlling them, making the CEB inefficient, and those are the people who should be blamed. I'm not saying this is in verbatim, but this is not word to word, but this is my understanding of what he mentioned. So what sort of a role does the public sector of Sri Lanka also have to play, particularly when it comes to trade unions, Nuwan, in ensuring that the consumers or the general public are given an uninterrupted service, at least when it comes to commodities in Sri Lanka? Because we've seen ministers and trade unions at loggerheads, and ultimately those who deal with the brunt of that is the general public, you and I. What sort of a role do trade unions have to also play in working together with governments, collaborating and ensuring that the general public are not inconvenienced in any way?
Actually, trade unions are concerned now, according to trade union ordinance, the main concern of the trade union to protect the rights of the workers. So that's the main thing. So basically now, for example, the electricity board is concerned. Now throughout the history, we know how they have been struggling to give continuous supply to the people. But at the same time, they are fighting for their day-to-day rights. What's wrong in it? Now today, I think there is a strike in the railway department. So of course now there are days, some weeks there are strike, but when you as a whole, all the year with under very severe condition, they are providing their services, all the sectors like that. So we cannot say their demands are unfair, because they are always representing their workers' rights. So now you actually asked a good question about this efficiency and all these things. Now ultimately, now minister is saying that once, according to Sri Lankan system, one minister is appointed, automatically through the other laws he get massive power to run these institutions. That's the reality. Then if these institutions are not profitable and it's a burden to the people, who's responsible? Then this particular parliament and cabinet is responsible. They are only inefficient. Now they are going to privatize electricity board, saying that inefficient. What we can do for the inefficiency of the parliament? Then I think they must bring a bill to privatize the parliament, divide into 5 or 6 companies.
I think that's already there.
giving the all state powers to private companies.
Yes.
Then you first do it, because you are liable for these inefficiencies. So now for there is a actually, as far as electricity board is concerned, there is an allegation that throughout all the ministers wanted to provide certain employee their electorate, they gave jobs to the who are in their electorate.
All right, okay.
That issue is there in yes.
I see.
That issue is there in the Petroleum Corporation as well.
Political appointments.
So there is a overcrowded. The employments are concerned. So who's liable for that? Who's responsible? These ministers. So ultimately, they are passing the ball to the people, working class, trade unions. You are liable to that. But they are the people who did the administration part, and they had the control over these things. So I think all these fabrications just to justify their hidden agenda, their ulterior motive.
All right, understood. Thank you very much, gentlemen, Attorney at Law Nuwan Bopage and Attorney at Law Att Thishya Weragoda, for joining me this evening and sharing your valuable insight regarding the energy sector, the power generation sector reforms that are to be introduced here in Sri Lanka. We had a very insightful conversation, and I'm sure that our viewers also got a more expansive view on what is in store, especially in terms of power generation and also energy in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much once again. We wish you all the success for all the great work that you are doing on behalf of the discerning general public in Sri Lanka. And that's the way it was on Face to Face this evening. Thank you very much for stopping by. Take care and have yourselves a great night.